Hello, everyone. I'm Marty Murray. I'm head of curriculum development at Target Test Prep. And today we're going to talk about a topic that's a little unusual because not everybody wants to do this, but we're going to talk about how to prepare for GMAT verbal in a rush in 2 weeks, as a matter of fact. So if you can hear me, let me know by telling me where you're from, any challenges you're having in verbal or anything else. We're going to get into this, and we're going to the funny thing is, it's not completely insane to try to prepare for GMAT verbal in 2 weeks. I mean, yeah, ideally you'd prepare for a few months, but depending on your starting point, what we're going to see is that there are ways we can increase our verbal score in 2 weeks. There are things we can really do, and it's possible to make some real progress in 2 weeks and potentially get a great GMAT verbal score, okay? So we're going to talk about a few different angles here and really nail some of the most important key tips for getting a high verbal score if you can do it in in 2 weeks or 3 or something like that. Okay. So, okay, good to see you're out there. Welcome from India, from the UAE. Pretty excited to be here too. Okay, so now the first thing we're going to do, if you haven't already done this, and this is you're just getting into the GMAT, is of course you want to familiarize yourself with the 3 main GMAT verbal question types, which are sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. So you don't have to spend a lot of time on this. You're going to see why we're doing this in a minute. But you can go through some questions to get a sense of how they work. The sentence correction questions, get a sense of how to go through the choices. Critical reasoning, there are a number of different types, and you just want to get a sense of, okay, I have a passage, and then a question, and then some answer choices. And finally, reading comprehension, get a sense of, okay, here's how I go through the passages, here's how the questions appear, and get a sense, okay, you need to be aware that you're going to get maybe 3 or 4 questions for each passage. So you want to be ready for that. And then we're going to hit our next step. And this is a super important step. And this is a take an official practice test, okay? If you haven't done this already, I'm not saying to do it right away. A lot of people talk about taking a cold practice test. So basically, the first thing they do before you do any GMAT prep at all, before you've seen any questions, take a cold practice test and get your starting point. Well, you will get some kind of starting point if you take an official practice test before you do anything else. But the reason I said to go through the practice questions first, or some questions first, and get a sense of the sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension, is so that you're not flailing around when you take the first practice test, right? Because you don't want that to be part of your first practice test, is not having any idea what you're doing. You really want to, you want to get into this practice test as if you at least know how to take the test. So you go through some questions, and you want to do it for quant too. So go through quant and verbal, and then take an official practice test. And by doing this, okay, we're going to get 2 things. One is it's going to be helpful to get us indication of our starting point. And this might inform your choosing whether you should actually prepare for the GMAT or GMAT verbal for 2 weeks. Because if your starting point is well below your score goal, of course, there's a good chance you're going to want to reset your GMAT plan. And you shouldn't be afraid to do that, by the way. A lot of people say, oh, my apps are due in, whatever, January or December, and I got to get this done. And, if you have to wait an extra year to get into your school of choice, it might just be worth it, because if that school is really going to, propel your career the way you want it to, then it might be a good idea to wait a year and apply, in September, and really give yourself time to get that GMAT score you need. Now, the second point is possibly assuming that we're going to attempt to prepare for GMAT verbal in only 2 weeks, is to get a sense of the GMAT game. And this, you cannot undervalue, or you cannot overvalue rather, this second point, okay? Because when you know what you're shooting for, you're going to do a much better job of shooting for it, right? So it's really super helpful to have a sense of the game we're against here, the sense of the GMAT game before we start preparing. So that's why this first official practice test can be huge, because you really want to know, well, what's going on here? And there's different aspects of it, right? Like when you take that first practice test, you notice the time, and you're like, gosh, I have 1 minute and 48 seconds for each verbal practice question. And that's going to inform how you prepare. And you're going to get a sense of how the stress is, and how you miss choices, and how you fall for traps, and all that stuff. And you're going to get a sense of the GMAT verbal game. And the thing is, and beyond what you're going to get from the official practice test, there are some key things to understand about the GMAT verbal game that you really want to understand. Okay. Number one, this is not a test, even though GMAT verbal is only words, it's sentences, it's little passages, and we've seen this kind of thing all the way through school. We've seen that kind of thing in the 8th grade, right? But the GMAT is not a test for middle school or high school or anything. It's a test like that. It's a test for admission to graduate school. So we really have to be aware of that when we're going into our verbal prep. If you want to nail GMAT verbal in 2 weeks, you have to be super clear about what GMAT verbal is about. Okay. So it's a test for admission to graduate school. So what that means is it's fairly sophisticated. So to nail this thing, we have to be sophisticated in how we prepare. We have to be sophisticated in our thinking as well about the questions, okay? So remember that as we're going through all of this, think about it's a fairly sophisticated test. The critical reasoning questions they're pretty sophisticated. So, if you're thinking, well, I'm going to learn this in 2 weeks and give me some hacks, right? Give me some quick hacks. Like I can learn to answer critical reasoning questions by, oh, you might read online, you can eliminate extreme choices. Depending on what you want to score on GMAT verbal, that might help, but hacks are not going to get you to a high GMAT verbal score, okay? You really want to nail this thing. You have to think, I'm going to have to be fairly sophisticated. And think about it. Let's say you're strong in quant already. Well, the GMAT verbal game is a lot more like quant than you might think. You're really solving problems and using logic and seeing how things add up and what factors affect another thing, right? So you got to think about GMAT verbal in the right way if you want to nail this thing in 2 weeks or even 3 or even, however long you're doing it. But let's, be sure that you're very clear about the GMAT verbal game going into this because that is the foundation of your success. Okay. The next thing we'll talk about is analyzing your practice test results, okay? So after you take that practice test, okay, we get a score, so that's interesting. You're going to get a quant score and a verbal score, which will also be interesting. And then the next thing you want to do is go through the verbal section and find your percentage correct in each of the 3 main topics. So sentence correction, there'll be about 12 questions. Did you get half of them correct, a third of them correct, most of them correct? And this, you want to get a sense of, well, where's my low-hanging fruit here and what can I help myself by working on? And the other thing you're going to do is do your best to get a sense of what types of questions you're missing and why. Now, this is going to be a little tough in the beginning because you're new to this anyway. But you can start getting a sense, I missed the sentence correction questions that did this, or I did well in the critical reasoning questions that work one way, but I didn't do well in the ones that do work another way. In reading comprehension, we have primary purpose, we have structure, we have detail questions. Well, which ones are you getting right? Some people have an easy time getting the detail questions right, and a devil of a time getting the primary purpose questions right. So getting a sense of this and making some notes will really help because having this information is going to help you direct your preparation to maximize the results of your 2 weeks of prep, right? So the more you get a sense of once again, we're looking at the target we're shooting for, and the name of the game is going to be high ROI, right? We got to have high ROI through our return on investment through our 2 weeks of prep. So definitely want to get a sense of what we're missing, what we can work on. The more we can get a sense of that, the better we're going to do in this 2 weeks. Okay. Okay, so now there are going to be 3 main goals, 3, not 2, main goals of our GMAT preparation. The first is learn concepts. And people always do this in GMAT verbal prep. You learn concepts such as sentence correction, elements, such modifiers, pronouns, subject verb agreement, parallelism. You could learn a whole lot of stuff. You could spend months on it, right? But we're going to at least learn some concepts. The second thing we're going to do, and this is super powerful, is learning strategies, okay? We can learn strategies for each type of question. And I tell you what, learning strategies is huge. The third thing we can do is improve execution. GMAT verbal is so much about execution. I mean, anybody taking this test we all speak English to one degree or another. And improving your execution, how you go through the questions, how careful you are, whether you get trapped, whether you read the entire choice, it's going to make a huge difference. I've seen people whose written English is really weak score super high in the upper 40s on GMAT verbal because their execution was strong. Okay, and of these 3, I would say that if we only have 2 weeks, that learning strategies and improving execution are going to be the biggest. Okay. Because learning concepts, I mean, you have 2 weeks, so you're going to learn hundreds and hundreds of concepts. You're going to learn every sentence correction concept. You're going to learn every question type in critical reasoning. Are you going to learn every keyword to answer reading comprehension questions carefully? Probably not. Okay, in 2 weeks. But what you can do, literally, is you can learn a strategy for every type of verbal question. And I'm not sure we have to learn a strategy for every type, but learning strategies is huge in verbal. So if you're not aware of this, like say for instance, you can see a weak in critical reasoning question, and you can muddle your way through and you might get the answer correct. But if you have a strategy for answering this and you know how people have done this before and an effective way to do it, number one, you'll get through the question much faster because you'll know, okay, the first thing I need to do is read the passage. Second thing I need to do is read the question. Third thing I need to do is go back and confirm the conclusion, and so forth. And you'll cruise through the questions because you know strategies, okay? And this is something you can do in 2 weeks. So a lot of people talk about in GMAT verbal, you've probably seen posts or, on forums, gosh, I'm having trouble with the timing on GMAT verbal. And maybe you're having trouble with that too. You took that first practice test and you had trouble getting through the section on time. Well, a huge thing you can do to get through the section on time is learn strategies. Because if you have a strategy, you know what to do, you know when to do it, and you just cruise through the questions. And this applies to pretty much any type of GMAT verbal question, although the sentence correction questions we're a little looser with our strategy on those. But the other types, there's clear ways to go through them. And also, so the next thing we can do, the second main thing we can do is improve execution. And I mean, this is, you can do this in 2 weeks, right? Because, okay, you don't have to learn 1,000 concepts. I guess there aren't 1,000, maybe there's 80 key sentence correction concepts that you could go through and a number of concepts for the other types of questions. But you can certainly improve execution. You can do things like reading the entire answer choice, reading the question carefully, right? You can do things like making sure that when you go back to the passage, you're finding the right part of it, all these aspects of execution. Another great one is in sentence correction. A lot of time people choose answer choice E, okay? Why do they choose E? Because you get so worn out by the time you go through all the choices that you just say, E looks pretty good, I'm gonna choose it. So learning to not do something like that can take your score up points, right? So execution is huge. So if you have 2 weeks to prepare for verbal, learning strategies and learning about execution is really going to help. Now, someone's asking, will I be sharing these strategies in this live stream? The strategies for each type of question goes beyond the scope of this. I'm going to show you some strategies, at least for sentence correction. But to go through, there's sentence correction, then there's like, I don't know, 10 or 11 types of critical reasoning questions. There's another approximately 7 types of reading comprehension questions. We don't have time to go through all these strategies, but my point is you can find some resources and learn the strategies. For instance, in TTP course, we have a strategy for each question type, and so you can find that you can use a TTP course or another resource and just learn a strategy for each type of question that's going to make a big difference. And somebody's saying you guessed on E. Yep. What else is going on here? Having a low accuracy in RC. Would TTP help? I think so because, okay, yeah, we have the TTP RC strategies are super solid. And we also go over all the trap choices, So yeah, that'll be super helpful. And okay, so let's continue on. So these are your 3 things. We're going to learn concepts for each question type, right? Learn strategies and improve execution. Now going specifically, so for each verbal question type, we kind of talked about this a little now. We're going to learn the concepts and strategies and improve execution. And then, okay, even though you only have 2 weeks, a lot of people want to get their timing down. So you figure, I got to start off, man, I only have 2 weeks, so I got to do my practice time. I got to be ready for this test. So I'm going to give myself 2 minutes per question, or maybe to be more exact, 148 per verbal question. And I'm going to do all my practice time. And you know what's going to happen? You're not going to make half as much progress as you could if you did the questions untimed. okay? I know you only have 2 weeks, let's say, or 3, or whatever you're thinking here, but start off your practice on time, because you'll learn so much more and so much faster by doing the questions on time. Think of it this way. If you do a question in 1 minute 48 seconds, you're blasting through the choices, the passages, the questions. You don't have time to figure out what's going on. You have time to figure out how that modifier affects the sentence, or how that weakener works, or really analyze the answer choices in a reading comprehension question. You're just burning through the questions. And people do this all the time, okay? Practice can be your weak link. That's what I've seen. People know they need to learn the concepts. They know they need to take practice tests. They know to do all these things. And then they practice how they practice the questions is the weak link in their prep. They do all their practice timed. They do a million practice questions, and they say, why isn't my score going up? I've seen people do great in GMAT Verbal by doing 10 practice questions a day, okay? As opposed to 50 or 70 or whatever insane number. And if you have only 2 weeks, you're probably gonna wanna do more than 10 a day. But you see my point. Practice on time for each type. So when you're going through sentence correction, do them untimed at first. Do easy, untimed, until you really feel comfortable answering the questions. Same thing for medium, and then hard. And then once you say, you know what, I kind of get how this is going, then say, well, how can I do these faster? You know? And yeah, someone's mentioning another thing, timing, doing all your practice time burns through your resources. You run through all the sentence correction questions, and there are thousands of them. You know, if you're using a TTP course, people come to me, oh, I'm running out of practice questions. There's over, you know, there's like 1,100 verbal practice questions in there. But here's the thing. There's 5 answer choices in each verbal practice question, right? In a quant question, we really only care about the correct answer. If it's asking for John's rate, you calculate the rate and you select the rate from the answer choices. But in verbal, each answer choice is a question. Think about it. So you can spend a few minutes, not just a few minutes on the question, but a few minutes on each choice going, you know, this choice looks like a strengthener, but maybe it's actually a weakener. Let me go back to the passage and see. You know, and you might think, well, how am I ever going to learn that way if I'm spending 15 minutes on one question? Well, what's happening as you're doing that is you're getting the pattern of the question down. You're getting the pattern of how to think about it down. And next time you see one that goes, you know, it looks like a strengthener, but it's probably a weakener. Now it's not going to take you 3 minutes because you spent the time to do it the first time and went through the motions that lead to success, right? And that's so much of what verbal is about, is going through the motions that lead to success. Because, you know, in critical reasoning, there's not a million concepts. And there's only one strategy really for each question type. So in some sense, what we're really working on as we're working on critical reasoning is going through the motions that lead to success. Okay, so that's why you want to practice untimed. And then work on answering the questions faster. Now, if you had, you know, 6 months to prepare for GMAT Verbal, or 3, or what, you know, more than 2 weeks, which you may already have, maybe we're talking about the last 2 weeks of your prep, I would say don't answer the questions at test pace until you're achieving your target accuracy on time. So for instance, if you're shooting for 40 in verbal, you're only going to see medium and hard questions when you're taking the test if you're scoring at that level. And you need to get about 80%, or if you want to go higher, 85 or 90% of the questions correct. So in that case, you should practice untimed until you're getting 90% of the medium questions correct and maybe 80% or 70% of the hard questions correct. Then once you're, 90 to 100% untimed, then work on answering them faster. And imagine if you tried doing that timed, you'd never get to that level, right? So if you have more time to prepare, or if you're tuning up your prep now, which is a lot of people are doing, if you're tuning up your prep, then shoot for that high accuracy. That is going to, high accuracy in verbal is the name of the game. Yeah, you learn the concepts, you learn the strategies, and you want to speed up, shoot for high accuracy in your prep on time. And you know why that works? Because precision, whatever that is, no, but really precision is what makes you fast, okay? If you can see very precisely what's going on in the question, then you're going to answer the question quickly. And how are you going to develop that precision? You can develop that precision by practicing untimed and shooting for high accuracy, because precision is what results in high accuracy. So by shooting for high accuracy, you're also shooting for high speed. Just want to check and see what questions we have coming in. Okay, we have a few things. I score in the V40s consistently in the official mocks, but ended up with V33. What should I do to decrease that gap? Um, you might have prepared. A lot of time what happens to people is a lot of preparation tips we see and like the gimmicks and like eliminate this kind of choice. And even some of the questions in some of the GMAT courses, they are training us for the official practice test. So what can end up happening is you train for the official practice test as opposed to for the GMAT. So to address that, what you need to do is do more practice and really think about learning some general concepts, fundamentals. Like how am I using logic to answer this critical reasoning question? For instance, there's a rule out there that people will tell you, well, if a choice is about one city and the passage is about another one, the choice doesn't affect the argument. That only applied in a couple of GMAT questions that appear on the official practice test. So in the real GMAT, information about a city could apply to another city. But if you learn that rule, that so-called rule about the GMAT, then you'll get 40 plus in the official practice test. And you go to take the real GMAT, and what happens? That rule doesn't apply because that was only something specific to one question. So the key thing to get your score to go up, if it's not, if your official practice test scores aren't matching your actual verbal test scores, is you think, am I using very sophisticated reasoning? Am I being logical? Or am I doing what people told me to do, some hacks? This always works in sentence score, always works. Being is always incorrect, they'll tell you. Well, if you're doing that, you'll do great on the official practice test, but not so much on the real thing. Another thing, of course, is test anxiety. That can happen on the real test, or or we can fall back into old habits. And so I don't want to go on too long about that, but those are some thoughts that you could do. Try not to fall into old habits. Be sophisticated in how you're answering the questions. Make sure you're using good practices, as we're going to learn by practicing untimed. Okay. Okay. And as far as practicing, someone's asking about LSAT questions. They're not ideal, but remember, execution is key. So you can learn to execute with any type of critical reasoning questions or any type of RC questions, right? So if you're running out of GMAT questions, it would be better not to burn through them all. But yes, you can use LSAT questions because execution is very, very key. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the specific topics now. In sentence correction, if you're really preparing for only 2 weeks, you have to find some key things that are going to be easy to learn, and and they're going to be really, really high return on investment. Okay, so I listed a few here. If you have a little more time to prepare, you could go beyond this, but I would say that subject verb agreement is huge because a lot of time it shows up in questions and it can help you eliminate easy out choices because the subjects and verbs don't agree. So I would say definitely if you're preparing for a short amount of time, you want to make sure you have the subject verb agreement. And there's, some key things. You don't have to learn every subject verb agreement rule because there's a lot of them. Like what does either do? What does or do? What does the majority do? What does a majority do? But you can learn some of them and be aware of things like the GMAT will put the subject way over here and the verb way over here and put a modifier in between. Right? So if you're aware that they do that and you're like, if you're kind of used to looking for subject verb agreement, you're going to really help yourself in sentence correction by eliminating some choices with issues you might not have seen. The second one is really close to my heart, and that's learning about modifiers. I think if there's one thing you could study, for sentence correction and nothing else, modifiers would be high on the list because modifiers affect the meaning. And they just really seeing the different placement of modifiers and how the different types of modifiers work is going to help so much. So the more time you can spend on modifiers, if you're preparing for 1 week, do some modifiers work. 2 weeks, do more modifiers work. 3 weeks, get all the modifiers down, right? How the different types work, it's going to make a big difference. Another one is parallelism. There's only a few things to learn about parallelism. It's basically logic. So you could spend an hour or two in parallelism and just basically get it, and learn that there's some trigger words for parallelism, like not only but also, and is a trigger word for parallelism. And if you can learn to see the list and kind of go through them logically, you might even be able to do it in an hour. So I would definitely work on parallelism because it's going to show up in your test. Finally, a huge thing is meaning, and once again, so the cool thing about meaning is you don't have to learn 200 concepts to get better at understanding the meaning of the sentence correction questions, right? Meaning and sentence correction is just involves learning to read sentences very literally. It involves learning to read sentences differently from how we normally read them. You know, when you normally read something by a friend or in a book, you, an email, a text, you know, it doesn't have to be perfectly written, but you kind of give the writer the benefit of the doubt, right? So you're used to reading that way. So if I say, by going to Puerto Rico, it was really fun for us. Well, you know exactly. Or I say, by going to Puerto Rico in the off season, it was really fun for us. You know, there's no referent for it. So the meaning of that sentence is really kind of is strange. It doesn't really mean anything. But if someone sent you that in a text, you would know exactly what the person meant, right? It means by going to Puerto Rico, we had fun, right? Okay. So, but if you see that in a sentence correction question, you'd be going, wait, you know, it doesn't really say who or what was fun. So that meaning doesn't make sense. So if we just by learning to read in this different way, reading everything very literally, you can definitely get more sentence correction questions correct. You know, so that's it, the fourth thing I would focus on. It's just saying, let me get used to this meaning thing. Let me get used to reading in this different way. You know, and that'll help me with sentence correction. And then there's basically one strategy for sentence correction you can learn. And that strategy is you go through the question, you read the original sentence, and then you eliminate easy outs. So there's going to be grammar issues in some of the choices, or other choices, the meaning is going to be obviously completely insane. And then you're left with two or three choices with more subtle issues, and you work your way through them. So there's one strategy for sentence correction questions. And we go into more detail on this in the course, but you can see that if you get used to going, okay, I just got to get to the easy outs first, and then compare the other choices carefully to see which one is really the most effective, then you know you can get through most sentence correction questions. That's a basic strategy that's going to work. Let me see what other questions are coming in. Someone's asking about the TTP webinars. You know, yeah, they're free, and they're every Thursday and Friday. Quant's on Thursday and verbals on Friday. I shouldn't say every. Yeah, maybe 2 out of 3. What should be the sequence of studying if we're starting from scratch? I would say do SC first, then CR second, and reading comprehension third. And the reason being that sentence correction gives you a foundation in reading sentences very carefully. Okay. Then critical reasoning takes you to another level of going through passages with multiple sentences in them and seeing what the implications are. And then reading comprehension is kind of like critical reasoning with a longer format where you have to look through the passage and find the correct information. So they all kind of build on each other. Next question. I was scoring V44 in the mocks and scored 33 on the real. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. It was mainly due to gimmicky concepts that I learned and also because of anxiety. Exactly. Yep. Depends on what. Okay, let's see what else is going on. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, I brought a sentence correction question today to illustrate what we're talking about learning about meaning, modifiers, subject verb agreement. I want you to see this is a fairly tricky question. You know, so let's go through it. I'll give you a couple minutes. You can put your answers in the chat. Just give everybody a couple minutes before you put your answer in. And go through this question and see how 3 things, modifiers, your basic subject verb agreement, and meaning will get you to the correct answer if you're careful. And you'll see that so many sentence correction questions, it's pretty much the case. So 2 minutes on this one, and then we'll come back. Seem to have a consensus here. See a little disagreement. Any other ideas? Any other arguments? Okay, we have two popular choices here. One is C and the other is A. So let's go through this question and see what's going on. And when we do sentence correction questions, as I said, our strategy is to read the entire original sentence first, and then we're going to go through and find easy outs, and then maybe find some more difficult choices to go through, and that we have are more subtle issues in them. So some wellness coaches claim that by doing meditation and following a vegan diet, the aging of people has been reversed in its process. Okay, so there's our original version. We see the sentence is about something about meditation following a vegan diet, and the aging of people has been reversed. Okay, so what's the meaning? What do we see in this choice? Does anybody see something wrong with this? And we're talking about, let's talk about modifiers, subject verb agreement, and meaning. See anything going on? Because I see an issue here with a modifier, okay? So if we read the sentences, by doing meditation and following a vegan diet, the aging of people has been reversed. So it sounds like the aging is doing meditation. Exactly, an incorrect modifier, right? The aging, by doing meditation and following a vegan diet, the aging has been reversed. So how did the aging accomplish being reversed? By the aging did meditation and followed a vegan diet. Now, so we can see the power of modifiers here, right? We can eat this choice a lot. People are choosing this choice, but as soon as you know how these prepositional modifiers work, this by doing meditation goes with the verb has been reversed and therefore has to work with the subject. You'll never miss a question like this, or never choose a choice like that again, okay? Now, I know sometimes people write this way, by doing something has occurred, but it's really not correct. By doing means that somebody did something, accomplished something by doing something. So this says the aging has been reversed by doing meditation, right? So the aging did it, okay? Yeah. Okay, and there's another little issue here. It's a little more subtle. The aging has been reversed in its process. What on earth does that mean? It has been reversed in its process. Isn't that a convoluted way of saying something? It's been reversed. How do you reverse aging in its process? It's sort of a meaningless, nonsensical way of saying something, and that's another type of thing you'll pick up on. And notice it sounds funny. You see reverse in its process, but you can spend a little more time on it and go, well, what does that really mean? And kind of say, well, so we're saying in the process, it got reversed? That doesn't make any sense. So you can really take it to the level of nailing it. So the first sign is it sounds funny, and the second sign is that you realize the meaning is completely insane. So A is gone. How about B? Doing meditation and following a vegan diet has reversed people who were in the aging process. I see two issues here. Two issues here. And someone's saying, well, I eliminate A because it sounds funny. Yeah, but once you know the modifiers, then you don't have to do that. But if you're trying to take the test in 2 weeks, it sometimes works to eliminate a choice that sounds funny. But what you really want to do is identify that it sounds funny and then figure out exactly what is wrong with it. So if you have, depending on how much time you have to prepare, the better you can get at identifying exactly what actually is wrong, the better it's going to go. So let's look at B. Some wellness coaches claim that by doing meditation and following a vegan diet has reversed people who were in the aging process. I see two issues with this. One thing that jumps out at me is that doing meditation and following a vegan diet is two things. So you see the subject verb agreement issue here? Doing meditation and following a vegan diet has. Well, it should be have, right? Because we have two things that are accomplishing, the verb should be plural. But the even more interesting is that doing meditation and following a vegan diet has reversed people Well, how does it reverse people? So it says reverse people who are in the aging process. So it's not connected. It's not saying reverse the aging process or somehow reverse people's aging process. It says reverse the people. And these people happen to be in the aging process, right? But does it reverse the aging process? It doesn't even say that, does it? And is there no, there's not really there's no parallelism issue here. And the key thing to know about parallelism is that things that are parallel don't have to be exactly the same. So we don't have to say doing meditation and following vegan, or something that sounds exactly the same. So there's no parallelism issue here. But okay, it's reverse people who are in the aging process. Well, these people, so it's not saying reverse the aging process, reverse people who happen to be in the aging process, totally disconnected the meaning. Doesn't make sense at all. Let's skip C. It's the most popular choice. I have a feeling it's going to be correct. How about D? Doing meditation and following a vegan diet has been the reverse of people. What jumps out at you there, right? So that meditation and following a diet is the reverse, is the opposite of people. We can clearly articulate what the issue is here, that doing meditation and following a diet wouldn't be the reverse of people. Okay. That doesn't make any sense. And oh, right, it should be have been. I didn't even catch that. I was so focused on the meaning issue. It says doing meditation and following a vegan diet have been the reverse of people. It should be. That's a plural subject again. So D is out. How about E? Through doing meditation and following a vegan diet, people have been reversed in their aging processes. And this is kind of a tempting choice. What if you were tired from this question? You got through those first four choices, and you're like, oh man, they all sound funny. They're a mess. I'm assuming you went through E2 and you got C through C2 and you got to E. And you go through doing meditation, following a vegan diet. People have been, well, now the modifier is not misplaced. So through doing meditation, people have done something. There's no subject verb agreement error. I think I'm going to choose E, right? But if we read the entire choice, which is a key part of our execution, right, is reading the entire choice. Let's do it. Through doing meditation and following a vegan diet, people have been reversed in their aging processes. What on earth does that mean? How do people become reversed in their aging? So they're still aging, but they're reversed in the process. It's not just that it's too wordy. I mean, that's an interesting way of putting it. And it's not just that it's passive voice. It's really not. And I did a session yesterday on the thinking for V51 scoring, and we talked about the fact that the passive voice isn't always incorrect. And this is the kind of thing. Look, if you're trying to just get through the test and get to a low 30 score, you can certainly eliminate every choice with a passive voice, and you'll probably do okay. But you can't just eliminate every choice with a passive voice. You got to be more sophisticated. It's a sophisticated test. So the issue is not that it uses a passive voice. The issue is that it says that people have been reversed. The literal meaning, they've been reversed. We reverse people in their aging processes. What does that even mean? So Jim was reversed in his aging process. So is he still aging? Yeah, he is, but he's reversed it now. So he was getting older forward, now he's getting older backward. Meaning is insane. So that's why it's out, not just because it's passive voice. Okay, so let's go back to C and see how it compares with these other choices, right? Okay, through doing meditation and following a vegan diet, people have reversed the process of aging, right? So look what they did here. The modifier works. Through doing X, people have done Y. Perfect. We also, do we have any subject verb agreement errors? Through doing meditation, people have reversed. And finally, what have they reversed? They reversed the process of aging. That makes sense, right? The people accomplished an end, and the end was reversing the aging process, right? Now, the funny thing about this choice is it's written, I might have said by doing meditation instead of through doing meditation, but the GMAT's not always going to make it that easy for us. They're not going to make it that easy for us. They're often going to make the correct answer sound a little funny so that we don't just, if the correct version always sounded perfectly correct, then we would pick it right away, right? So it uses through, and it reversed the process of aging. It doesn't say the aging process, which would be a little less wordy, but the most concise choice isn't always going to be correct. But C definitely works. There's no subject verb agreement errors, no modifier errors, and no meaning errors. So we can get to that. We can get through this question and many, many others by considering those three things. Okay. And clearly, if you could learn your pronouns and your comparisons and everything else, it's going to help. But those, I'm just saying that those, if you get those down, it's going to help a lot. Okay. Let's see. I got a couple questions. I have my GMAT. Well, so someone's asking if I have my GMAT in 2 weeks. Let's see what we talk about here, and then a lot of it's going to come down to exactly what we're talking about here. Just shooting for that high accuracy and practice will take your score up in the next couple weeks. Um, and that's continuing to work on your strategy, learning some new strategies. If you don't have strategies, look for your weak areas and keep addressing those. So weak areas, strategies, and execution are going to help. Easy outs have improved my accuracy. Yep. Does the subject have to be mentioned in a passive voice sentence? Well, the subject has to be mentioned, right, but the actor does not have to be mentioned. In fact, often it's not. And that brings up another point. Let's say it left out the word people or something, and it was correct. We don't have to have the same meaning or the same words in the correct version that we had in the original version. There's another myth that messes people up a lot. They think the original version is special in a sentence correction question, but it's not. The correct answer can be somewhat different from the original version, and that's fine. Okay, so you get the idea here, right? By learning some key concepts and executing well, we can make a lot of progress in sentence correction and in a few weeks. And obviously, the more you do of this, the higher your sentence correction score is going to be. But you can see kind of the things you can accomplish. Let's move on to critical reasoning. Critical reasoning, there are not quite as many concepts as there are in sentence correction, but there are a few key things we can learn. One of them is the parts of the argument, right? If you understand that arguments are made up of different parts, it's really going to help because you're going to understand how the arguments work better. So, the main parts of an argument are the background information. Then we have evidence or premises. We have assumptions that aren't stated, and then we have the conclusion. And those are the four main parts of an argument. So if you understand how each of those parts work, it's going to really help with critical reasoning. If the more you understand how the parts of arguments function together. Another thing is understanding how inferences work in critical reasoning. Normally, when we say inference, we mean, I get the impression from this, or this is the implication from this. But in GMAT critical reasoning, and not so much in reading comprehension, an inference is actually something that has to be true given the statements, and this is a key thing to understand, how statements support a conclusion or an inference, right? So we have parts of arguments, and we understand these inferences. That takes care of a whole other class of critical reasoning questions. What can we infer? And even understanding the reverse, well, what does an answer choice mean? What can we infer from an answer choice, right? So maybe I could say learning to see the logical implications of statements is the key to critical reasoning. In fact, we just added a new lesson and set of practice questions in the critical reasoning course on logical implications because it's so important. And a lot of people don't get this, okay? You might think that critical reasoning is about relevant versus irrelevant, scope versus out of scope, but a lot of things are irrelevant or a lot of things are in scope, right? And what we really want to be concerned with in critical reasoning is the logical implications of the parts of the argument. So what is the logical implication of this evidence? What is the logical implication of this answer choice? And when you get that critical reasoning is about the logical implications of statements, that's going to be huge. So if there's what you really want to do, if you have just a short time to prepare for verbal, or you want to drive your critical reasoning score higher, is say, how can I learn more about the logical implications about these statements? And I covered this once again in the video from yesterday and the V51 video, and it's also covered in the course over and over and over. You're going to go through the explanations are so focused on the logical implications, and you'll learn to think the way you need to think to get the correct answer to a critical reasoning. I guarantee you learn how to see what's going on with logical implications, whether it takes you a week or, I've literally seen someone go from around 31 in verbal to 38 in verbal by changing her way of thinking about these questions. And one of the main things she did was say, gosh, maybe I should be looking at the logical implications of statements in critical reasoning. Boom, her score went up so fast, So the type of stuff we're talking about here can definitely make a huge difference. Now, as far as strategies in critical reasoning, I would focus on strategies, depending on how much time you have. I would definitely get the assumption strategies down because assumption questions are the foundations of other types of questions. Weaken is it's very similar to assumption. So if you get the assumption, You get assumptions down in critical reasoning. Then you're also going to get the weaken because the strategy is similar, and strengthen the strategy similar to the strategy for assumption and weaken. So if you can get assumption and weaken and strengthen down, you're going to cover a lot of critical reasoning questions you're going to see on the test, and then inference is another. That said, if on the other side, if you can get those different question types down, at least practice some complete the passage, some boldface. If you have time to learn the strategy for boldface, then learn it. I love the strategy for boldface we have in the course. I was afraid of boldface until I learned that strategy, and once I learned it, I was, my gosh, I started getting them correct so much more easily. So yeah, if you can, the more questions you can learn the strategy for, the better off you're going to be. It's like, for instance, evaluate questions. The yes/no test is huge, makes a big difference. But learn these first 4 and then go to the others secondarily. Someone's asking, did I say we have a new logical implications chapter? We have a new logical implications, very long lesson with practice questions and targeted practice to really get you thinking about logical implications. It's in the introduction to critical reasoning chapter. So if you go back to that chapter, you can find it in there. I particularly struggle with little reading and RC. What will comprise working on the weak area strategies and execution in RC and improving reading precision? Right. Well, yeah, so you can go find a good resource that has a strategy for each type of reading comprehension question, and that'll also probably teach you how to get through the passages. So learn a strategy, a good one that's effective, and consider whether it makes sense, because there's a lot of things that people tell you to do, like, well, just read the first sentence of the paragraph, or just read the first and last paragraph, or the primary purpose is always in the first and last sentence. Those kind of strategies aren't necessarily going to get you where you want to go, but a good strategy for finding information in the passage will take you a long way. We're going to talk about reading comp in a minute some more, so I'll go get into that a little more in a second. How many questions should we practice on a daily basis to improve our verbal score? I would say minimum 8, and beyond that, depending, what your situation is. If let's say it takes you 5 minutes per question to get through the question, which is pretty reasonable, right? And then you review the question, your explanation, it could take 10 minutes per question. So if you were going to do 2.5 hours of verbal practice, let's do the math, that'd be 12, that'd be 15 questions. It might take you, let's say 20 questions a day would be kind of a nice target to really get through them very carefully and understand every choice. And remember, a verbal question has 5 relevant choices. So you saw when we went through that sentence correction question, we saw all kinds of details in every choice. There was so much to see in each choice, and someone pointed out in one, wait, this doesn't just have a meaning issue. It also has a subject-verb agreement issue. There's so much you can learn from every verbal choice. So take your time in the questions. So 8 would be some kind of minimum, 10 or 15, maybe 25, maybe 30 if you're doing a long day. You could go through 30. Sometimes in lessons, we go through 3 questions in an hour or something, depending how in deep you want to get into a question. Okay, so let's talk about reading comprehension. I would say that if you have a short time to prepare, the 2 things that I would focus on learning are the different passage types. Some passages are arguments. Some passages are, so they present like one person's argument and another person's argument, and then they conclude about it. Others are kind of historical analysis. Then we have something about like 2 different people's books. We see those a lot. Or maybe there's one about an experiment that says this is how the experiment worked, this is what they discovered, and these are the conclusions from the results. So if you get the idea of the different types of passages by going through some passages and going, oh wow, so this one is one of those ones that's about somebody's 2 arguments about a different topic, or this is one about somebody's life work and the author's opinion that life work. You'll get a sense of how to get through the passages better by understanding how they generally function. And maybe there's, I don't know, something like 10 different ways they can go. Another one is just learn the reading comprehension question types. They're not that many. There's primary purpose, there's structure, detail, inference, a few others. They're not that many. So if you understand the different question types, you'll be prepared for anything you're going to see. Of course, we go over these in the course, but you can find them in any decent RC resource, how the different question types. Having done that, I would say you want to definitely learn a strategy for primary purpose. And you want to definitely learn a strategy for what we call the info-based questions, which are detail and inference questions. They're very similar. You have to go back to the passage. Most of the questions you're going to see in reading comprehension are either going to be primary purpose, or they're going to be some kind of info-based detail or inference questions. So if you can get the strategies for these two types of questions down, once again, I'm assuming you're only, preparing for a short amount of time, or you want to boost your score, then I would focus on these two to start and really get them down. That's what I would do for RC. And someone had a question. So now, as far as working on weak areas, well, go back and figure out. Go through your error log if you're doing that, and it can be an error log can be super helpful even if you're preparing for only 2 weeks. You can log your errors and track everything that's going on. Go back to that and see what you're weak in, and then find a strategy for that. Identify why you're missing those questions, and we're going to talk about this more in a minute. And go back, and try to, is it an execution issue? Is it a concept issue? And address it. And that, address it. And this goes for critical reasoning, reading comprehension, or sentence correction. Anytime you miss a question, you want to move forward in your 2 weeks, identify why you missed it, right? Don't just, read the explanation. Identify why you missed the question, and there's an issue you can address. And if it caused you to miss a question, it's a high value issue, right? Like I could say, well, learn participial phrase modifiers. Or I could say learn relative clauses, or I could say learn trap choices and weakened questions. But if you're not missing any weakened questions, and you only have 2 weeks to prepare, then why would you bother learning about weakened questions more? And if you're not missing questions because of participial phrases, then you don't need to prepare for that. But if the prepositional phrases are killing you, well, great, you've discovered a high value thing you can work on, right? Say, I need to get these prepositions down. Now, a lot of people do have trouble with prepositions, and the GMAT uses different preposition in each version. So if that's what's tripping you up, then go learn about prepositions, right? If the participial phrases are tripping you up, go learn about those. This is a great way to get the high ROI prep in your short prep time. Now, a couple people were asking about the cost of the course. You can find that on our plans page on our Target Test Prep. If you do an internet search on Target Test Prep plans, you'll find it. Okay. So let's talk about the practice test fees. So what we've done for each, to review, for each topic, we learn some concepts, as many as we can, depending on our, we have to plan a little for our practice time. Then we practice untimed, and if you miss a question, you figure out why you miss it and you address it, right? And then you work on the time practice, and then finally we want to go back. Well, if you only have 2 weeks, sometime in the second week, you want to take a couple of practice tests, So you're going to go to the practice test phase, and you're going to take the entire test. You might as well take the integrated reasoning and the AWA section. Maybe if you're only taking 2 tests and you're really pressed for time, then maybe take them only on your last test. But anyway, you take the entire test in most cases. Okay, great. Do it timed. Do it. Remember, don't take extra breaks. Don't use the calculator on quant. Take the test for real, so you're really getting a sense of the experience. And then when you're done with the test, review your errors and identify what caused them. So look, if you're getting wrecked in critical reasoning, identify what caused it. You may find that it's all execution, right? And so oh gosh, I'm getting killed in critical reasoning. But if you say, well, it's all execution, I keep doing the same thing over and over again, you might be able to totally, go from 50% correct to 75% correct in a day or two, just by going back and addressing those execution issues with some untimed practice. Okay, identifying what's going on is huge. And the same thing at SC. Okay, always make these modifier issues are always getting me. Well, go back and review modifiers. Okay, now ideally you'd have gone through all the talks before you got to this point. But at least as you're taking a practice test, if you don't have time, you're going to either way, you're going to discover what's tripping you up and go back, review it, and address the issue. And you're going to continue to prepare with a focus on the topics with the highest ROI. Okay, any new questions? Okay, yeah, so that's your basic plan, right? And you can see how learning strategies is going to be huge in this. A lot of time people say, well, sentence correction is the easiest to improve. But if you're only preparing for 2 weeks, sentence correction could be easy to improve because you learn some concepts and then you just get better at it. But if you only have a couple weeks, you don't have time to learn every sentence correction concept, though I would say you have time to learn a lot. But execution is going to be huge. And strategies, if you have a short amount of time to prepare, I would say, look, I think you can get your critical reasoning accuracy up and your reading comprehension accuracy up by learning some strategies and really improving execution. And I'll reiterate, it's simple little things that add up. Reading the entire answer choice is huge. Making sure you're answering the question asked is huge. These kind of things that can add up. I've seen people go from getting 50% of critical reasoning questions correct to almost 100% correct. Why? Because I said, look, are you reading the whole passage or are you skipping words? Just something like that will totally change what somebody's doing because you're executing better. So if you're having trouble increasing your verbal score, so maybe this 2 weeks is your test is in 2 weeks, but you've been preparing for months. Think about, say, am I really executing well? And do that on-time practice and execute better. And that's going to take your score up, whether you've been preparing for 6 months and you're preparing for 2 weeks, or whether the 2 weeks is your entire preparation. Okay. So let's go over the key takeaways here. Key takeaways. Familiarize yourself with GMAT verbal questions and take a practice test, right? Okay, so then we're going to get a sense of the test. And remember, GMAT verbal is a fairly sophisticated test. So we had people asking, well, can I just eliminate because of passive voice? Probably not. Can I eliminate answer choices just because they're extreme? It's not that reliable. And if, by the way, if you do all these things that people say, well, the GMAT always does this. You go hard. Oh, the GMAT does this. That's what the GMAT did on the official practice test. That's what GMAT did in 1998. But what you really want to do is be sophisticated. So, you've learned from your practice test and from from this discussion and understanding this, you want to be sophisticated and do foundational, logical things to get the questions correct, not just learn a bunch of gimmicks. And then we're going to study each question type individually to learn high ROI concepts like modifiers or question types, learn high ROI strategies like how to answer primary purpose questions. Man, once I learned how to answer primary purpose questions, I felt so much better in RC myself. And then finally, we're going to practice on time first and shoot for high accuracy, right? Shoot for a high, I'm telling you, if your goal is high accuracy, you'll also get speed. Shoot for high accuracy to learn to execute perfectly. It's going to make a huge difference. I don't care if if someone said, well, what's the one thing I can do to get better in verbal? Well, we can all read English. We all know something about sentences. So learn to improve your execution. And that's going to get you to, and your overall thinking, right? Think in sophisticated ways and improve your execution. And regardless of what concepts you know or question types or anything else, your verbal score is going to improve. And then finally, we're going to take practice tests and review between each test to do prep focused on the issues that cause you to miss the questions. This is huge in verbal because you're going to say, and quant too for that matter, right? Whether you're working on GMAT quant or GMAT verbal, to prepare effectively at a certain point, we're going to go back and find the issues, right? This is the way GMAT preparation works most effectively. Go through, then it's like a performance check. Like, let's say we're building a car and we want to get, they test the car on the track, right? You do all the engineering first, but then you test the car on the track, you go, oh my gosh, the frame is bending. So what do we have to do to get this thing to do what we want it to do? Treat yourself like that too. Engineer yourself, get everything set up, then go take yourself out on the test track, see how it goes, review your metrics, and upgrade your performance with tweaks, whether it's learning a new concept or improving that strategy or going, gosh, I'm choosing answer choice E because I'm running out of steam. And that's the way you're going to make progress in your 2 weeks. And hopefully by going through this process, you'll see, I would think, if you do it well, effectively, you will see an increase in your verbal score because effective prep works. Someone's asking, can we use GMAT tests for practicing questions? Sure. I recommend it more for quant than verbal, but you can get some practice with those for sure. There's 1 month of time, enough time to prepare for a score goal of V45. I'm starting from a V34. I could be. It depends what you have to do. It depends what your foundational skills are. If in some people's cases, like if your reading skills aren't that strong and that's why you're V34, but your thinking is strong, It might be a little tougher because it takes a little longer to develop stronger reading skills. Now let's say on the flip side, if your reading skills are already super strong, but your execution is terrible, you might be able to go from V34 to V45 in a heartbeat because you just go, wait, I just have to execute better. I have to read the whole choice. Boom, your score goes up. So it kind of depends. I would think that going from V34 to V45 is more of a 2-month process. It's not really a 1-month process. If someone's asking, if I were to give a GMAT within a month, how frequently should I give a mock test? The mock tests aren't that important. I mean, they are an important part of your prep, but you should really be focusing on you learning as much as you can and getting better at answering individual questions. So maybe 1 a week you only have a month. I would say maybe in the second week, I would take 1, and then maybe take 1 or 2 in the third week, so total of 3 tests over your month. And of course, take some kind of practice test toward the beginning. So it really helps to get a sense of the test and what you're up against. Any chance to get Ron Purell to do some of TTP CR modules? We could talk to him about doing something about it. With that, I'm not sure. How to speed up your reading skills? Practice reading. That's the biggest way to do it. And and think about reading precisely is going to help you speed up. If you read each sentence precisely, then you don't have to reread. So a lot of what can help is doing untimed reading and saying, did I really understand the sentence? And making sure you understand the whole sentence and go to the next sentence. Did I really understand? Do I understand the point of the sentence? And you think, well, how is untimed reading going to help me with speeding up? But it helps you to realize how sentences work together and how things are structured and how wording goes. In the Intro to RC chapter on Target Test Prep, we have a long list of publications you can read articles from as well. So reading articles from those publications is super helpful. One of my favorites is Science Daily. I could read that practically all day long. It has so many cool articles in it about a variety of science topics, and I just find it super interesting. So, of course, my reading about science would improve by reading that because, science topics are all related. And so even some understanding of how topics are discussed can help as well. I just want to make sure I haven't skipped anybody's questions. How much time should each type of question take? That's a little bit of a long discussion, but sentence correction questions usually take the least time, but they take me more time than critical reasoning. So maybe like a minute to a minute and a half for sentence correction generally. Critical reasoning, maybe a minute 45 to 2:15, and reading comprehension, about 2 minutes per question if you include the passage along with the questions. Does GMAT practice test show the bifurcation of which subsection is weak? No, you have to figure that out on your own. Well, I'm not 100% sure. I haven't looked at the latest version recently, but if you really want to, it's not as good as it's not like your ESR that's going to show you everything as far as what you didn't do as well on. Your best bet is to just go through and find the questions, analyze them, and it's a great opportunity. Even the ESR for your official test doesn't show you that much. You really want to, if you could look at your official test, that'd be ideal. So do that after you take a practice test. Go through it yourself. I think I got everybody's questions. If I miss one, let me know. How to increase any publication you recommend for humanities? Maybe the Atlantic Monthly, New York Times. Harvard Magazine often has kind of humanities type of articles in it. I'm not talking about Harvard Business Review, but Harvard Magazine. I'm aiming for V35, but I'm currently on the V23. Yeah, you really do. It's basically what we're talking about here: learning the concepts, learning the strategies, and improving execution, and practicing untimed a lot. But you want to do it in a more thorough way than what we're talking about here. You want to cover all the concepts. Every new concept you learn drives your score up a little higher. Every new strategy you learn theoretically drives your score a little higher. Improving execution, you can go, gosh, I fall into answer choice C, or I don't read the entire choice. Doing one little step at a time will get you over time from V23 to V35. How to increase accuracy in CR questions? The main two things to do are focus on execution, right? To improve accuracy in CR, you really have to read those answer choices and really understand them and fully be very thorough. And really, the second thing is to focus on that logical implications, like I was saying, right? So, like, if you're basically, I'm saying increase the sophistication of your thinking in critical reasoning, right? So, if you want to improve in critical reasoning, am I really thinking about these questions in a sophisticated way, and am I being careful enough? So you want to analyze every choice so carefully. What is the relationship between the choice and the passage? The more you can say, well, this choice explains the passage, this choice strengthens the argument, this choice weakens the argument. What does this choice do? It qualifies something. The more you can identify what choices do, the higher you're going to score in critical reasoning. Someone's asked about the Chicago Tribune as a reading resource. I'm not really familiar with the Chicago Tribune. I would say just go through and see what you think. And and there's so many great publications out there. And a lot of it, what would really help is if you find one that has articles that interest you at least a little bit. Of course, that'll be a lot easier to read and it won't be as tiring and you'll just go and do it more and all that good stuff. Okay. So with that, I would say, just to show you that effective prep works, we got people coming through the course and they're doing exactly what we're talking about, right? In a very thorough way, scoring in the upper 700s. I'm sure you all know Dalal's story, But basically, if you do what you need to do, the main theme of all of this is you can see that there's a logic to the test. There's a logic to what works, okay? And if you do effective preparation, you will get results. You know that saying, if we do good things, I think it's from a Nike, well, people say this often, but I think in one of Nike's internal documents, to inspire the people working there is, look, if we do good things will happen. So if you do effective prep, your GMAT score will go up. Someone's saying, if I want to give a GMAT in 2 weeks, should I stick to OG questions only? Not necessarily. I mean, one answer to that question is you're probably going to need some resources to learn how to answer the questions. Okay, so you want to go back beyond going to the OG to saying, how can I do these? How can I learn to answer these questions? Because the OG doesn't teach that very well. Also you want to do categorized questions. So if you want to do 40 combinations questions, you're not going to find 40 challenging combinations questions in the OG, right? You're not going to find 40 challenging modifiers questions in a row in the OG. So it can help to use third-party resources that have categorized questions. So yeah, the OG questions are great, but depending on what you're looking to accomplish, you might want to go beyond it. Where can we find free practice tests? Free practice test, there's a page. If you look up best free practice tests online, you'll find a few different pages that list them. I have a problem with identifying pseudo strengtheners. Yes, pseudo strengtheners. And strengthener questions, that's one of the type of traps that's in there. You really have to learn to say, well, what is the real effect? What are the logical implications of this choice? And then we get to find the real strengthener versus the pseudo strengthener. So I think we probably should wrap up at this point. But you get the picture. Effective preparation works whether you're preparing for 2 weeks or 2 months or longer. It's really going to be the same basic things. Go through, learn the concepts, learn the strategies, and improve your execution. And by the way, in case any of you are not aware, through the rest of today, as some people are asking about the price of the Target Test Prep course, it is 20% off through the rest of today, and you can use this coupon code GMAT20 for the rest of today to get a sale price on the Target Test Prep course. If you want to do that, and as you know, it's been pretty effective for many people, and you can try us free for the rest of today. See whether you like the course before you purchase it at the sale price. I really appreciate you all coming out. It's always a blast. As you can tell, I enjoy this game. I like the thinking. I like the logic of it. I think it's pretty intricate, and GMAT is kind of an interesting it's almost like jewelry, how intricate the questions are, and how the questions are so interesting and make us really think. The one cool thing about the GMAT is it's really a test of just, can you get this done? And that's a great thing to be practicing and learning, you know, at this, as we go through life. It's just how to get things done. So the GMAT is a great opportunity to develop some cool skills. So I really appreciate you all coming out today. It's good to see you. And may your prep go well, may your studying go well, whether it's for 2 weeks or longer. And have a great rest of your day. And until next time.